Welcome to Upside, where we dig into the real stories behind the headlines affecting European venture.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Today there's Nomads. He's in Spain running up and down hills with a bunch of VCs and LPs. So this week you've got myself, I'm Dan Bowyer from SuperSeed VC, with Lomax from Outsized, and Pete Ward from Humanity. Now, Pete has been looking at human longevity since way before it was cool. Co-founded the entrepreneur community ICE, and If You're Old Farts Like We Are, and remember Where Are You Now, which was the world's largest social travel network, which he ran for 13 years. Welcome, Pete. Now, before we kick off, tell us a little bit about you and Humanity and all the cool stuff that you do.
Cheers, Dan. Hey, Lomax. Great to be here on Upside. Humanity is a big, bold mission of ours to give 1 billion years of health back to the world by the end of this decade. So I've got 5 years to achieve it. I've got an incredible co-founder, Michael Gear, who's also a member of ICE, who you guys probably know well. And we are using AI and health data to measure biological age and help people slow down their aging.
Lovely. Why did you start?
Why?
Yeah.
I think the real reason is loss of loved ones. So like many of us, I lost my dad to a stroke in his early 60s. My mum from smoking too much, and she suffered from bipolar disorder a lot of my life. And, these things were very lifestyle, environmental related. And Mike, he lost a loved one to late stage breast cancer. And that just left us feeling really helpless to help our loved ones and each other. And we just thought, well, we know how to get hundreds of millions of people to change behavior and engage and get value through these consumer tech platforms. So it kind of followed from that maybe we can do something here where we have this unique skill set where we can make a huge impact in the world. And frankly, I couldn't think of anything more impactful to do with my life after selling my last company than doing this. So here I am.
Yeah. Sounds super purposeful. It sounds like, I hate the stories that lives behind it. That's horrible and challenging and difficult, but what an amazingly purposeful thing. And I know Mike, and he's just a lovely human. It's just it's just an awesome thing done by two wonderful humans. So I think it's super cool.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
The docket is very full. We've basically got two themes today. We've got defense and health. And obviously we're leaning very much in health because I know, Pete, you'll probably have forgotten more than we could ever have known about the space. So I want to really dig into the health side and what the news has been in European venture and startups around health and health tech. Is such a big topic. Yeah. But it looks like pretty much the docket is health and defense. Fine. No great surprise there. But Lomax, what's been happening with you this week?
Personally, took some time off, went up the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, which was amazing. Survived half term with my 2 little kids, and got the keys, which are here, for a new office on the beach, just outside Lisbon. So, yeah, I know. Woe is me.
Sounds awful. Yeah.
You're all welcome to come and work anytime.
I think I might have to take you up on that. But Pete, you've not been faring so well with kids with chicken pox this week, have you?
No, indeed. My son's having a meltdown as we speak, I think, and my daughter needs to be picked up. So we'll see how that works out. But all the fun and games of that. But I'm very proud of my daughter, who just did an incredible dance off with like 150 of the other students at school. And I was just like, wow, this is so cool. So yeah, that was the highlight of my week personally.
I love those things. I love those things where you want to share it all, but no one's got any interest in it at all. No one wants to see the photos. No one wants to see the videos, but you're like, you're like so mega proud. I love it.
It's a bit like parents talking to other parents versus people that haven't had kids yet. No one wants to know about kids.
100%. No empathy.
We're part of the parent cult,
Yeah, we are. We're of that age. But let's kick off. Let's kick off at the top of the docket. So we're going to talk straight away. We're going to go into obviously very hot news around Ukraine, Trump cutting off intelligence, and there's all the jokes in there about military intelligence. You can load them all in yourselves. But there's obviously a massive impact of the US halting aid for Ukraine. But how will this affect the European venture and startup ecosystem? And one of the main questions for me and it's a very selfish request, is how much of this opportunity, as you like, will create private capital flowing through? Where will it come from and how? So we all know there's going to be a defense boom. We're going to talk about that a lot in this pod. There's quite a heavy theme of defense, and it's not a short-term solution. This is going to be Europe effectively switching on. Now, one aspect that I thought was going to be big, it already is, if you look at the data, is defense ETFs. I think this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch, what's going on in publics and how that will filter down into the private markets, how that will draw up even more venture capital and startup activity. But I had a quick look at some of the ETFs that are active last year, the year before. They're all relatively new. So there's the VanEck ETF, which is up 55% in 24. The EUAD, another defense ETF, up 27% year to date. And the MSCI Aerospace and Defense Index is up 27% in 2024 alone. So lots of activity going on in public markets, in the broader defense space. Pete, you had some questions and thoughts around this. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, I mean, first of all, Mike and I generally are very like humanity focused and how to be like pushing for peace. So just the full disclosure that that's very much anything that can get us to a lasting peace sooner is very much our personal sort of view on this. But looking at it from the point of view of European tech, VC and startup, I mean, there's clearly going to be a huge opportunity to create new defense tech funds or to invest in, especially drone, anti-drone sort of technologies, AI powered solutions. So I think that's just a very interesting area from the point of view of European tech ecosystem, because we have some great examples of, companies that are really doing well in that space already. I know Andrew Scott and 7% have invested in a really interesting drone company, for example. So yeah, I think I'm just curious as to seeing how quickly the European tech industry can like respond to that, and whether there's going to be any new government innovation grants to sort of fuel that in the sector as well.
There will be, I have no doubt. Is there anyone in ICE kind of doing dual use or moving into defense? Do you know? ICE is what, 300-400 entrepreneurs?
Yeah, 475 last count. Right. Interesting question, actually. I don't believe so. I need to be on Andrew more to get some of his portfolio companies to join. But I mean, I think it's there might well be, but they're not to my knowledge. Do you have any that you've invested in, Dan, or Lomax?
Yeah, we've been doing dual use. I'm very much with you and Mike. I'm very much on the human level. I'm a pacifist. It still kind of chills me to my core that we I don't like you, I'm going to invade your country, I'm going to shoot your. It's still at a kind of an intellectual level dumbfounds me that we're having these conversations. But on the other hand, the flip side of the same coin is that there are people like Putin, Kim Jong-il, Donald Trump, in power, men with very small penises and very large egos in control.
Well, you can say that on this podcast. Okay.
We can say whatever we want. It's our podcast. So we still live in a world. So we've been very much on the dual use side, where, for example, we invested in a federated learning platform last year, which effectively helps AI systems learn on device. So if you've got drones or autonomous vehicles of any kind, or autonomous anything of any kind, the algorithm doesn't need to go back to the mothership and doesn't need to then kind of process up in the cloud to then come back. Everything is much faster and much more secure. And obviously that can have a military application. I'm personally opposed to all these things, even though LPs in our fund are, very focused on defense. So I really struggle with this, but it's needed. This is the world that we live in. And I want to see Europe, stepping up. And the only way to do that is to invest in defense. And this is not going to just be governments. This is going to be the startup community, the mid-tier, the corporate. This is going to be a full stack effort from the spaces where Lomax and I play in these early stage startups, all the way up into government activity, government grants. But Lomax, you do dual use. You do defense, don't you?
We do dual use. We've made over the last 5-6 years 3 dual use investments, and then in the last 3 months 2 pure play defense investments. we are both not allergic to it and have both been, seen a big opportunity there. I think before the Ukraine war, so the last, sort of 8-10 years, dual use was an interesting way for early stage deep tech companies to get non-dilutive funding, because the governments, whether it was DARPA in the US or the MOD in the UK, would actually have some quite interesting contracts out there in the kind of 1 million, 2 million kind of, a lot of it is NRE, non-recurring engineering, but it was very, very good early stage non-dilutive funding for these deep tech companies that are still doing a lot of R&D and productization that had a number of applications. So we had a hyperspectral imaging investment that has actually now main application in healthcare and in industry, but they had a lot of funding from the MOD, and actually a company in a very similar space that you mentioned there, JI, had a very similar dynamic going on. But I think more broadly now, firstly, turning on the news is sort of, it's the first time in the last 10 years when I hesitate to actually open my phone. I mean, it's very, very crazy at the moment. But now it's a funny one for what does this actually mean for startups in Europe? Because on the one hand, you have defense budgets now being increased. Like every week you're seeing this. And I think, the European defense budget annually is roughly, if you include the UK, around 400 million, right, euros. I think that's going to go up
EDF.
to 5-6.
You talk about the EDF?
Not the EDF. I'm talking about if you aggregate all of the individual defense budgets.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
If you aggregate the defense budgets of the EU members plus the UK, it's around 400 billion euros, right? And if you add Turkey into that, which I think there's an interesting dynamic here with Turkey, because I think as part of this, I think Turkey becomes even more and more relevant strategically, both from a defense point of view, because they have, 500,000 soldiers, they have a big defense budget similar to France, and they're a key part of NATO, and they're totally aligned with us against Russia. I think there's a kind of interesting from a startup, we've already seen some really interesting non-defense Turkish startups, but I think we might see more integration with Turkey into the European startup kind of ecosystem. But just stepping back, we see the budgets growing. We've just seen, the newly elected chancellor in Germany remove the borrowing cap, which
to
with
3.5,
the aim of
right?
increasing up to 3.5. To take defense spending up to 3.5% of GDP before 2027.
That's not been approved yet, though, has it?
No, it needs to get approved by the sort of weirdly, it needs to get approved by the outgoing Bundestag, which good luck to them.
I thought it was the other Christian group and the ADF. I thought that
They need the
would be
Greens.
coalition.
I think. I mean, to be honest, if they don't get it approved by the outgoing Bundestag, they can get it by the new coalition. So it might be a matter of time before it actually gets approved.
And also, aren't all these commitments based on stuff that haven't actually been built yet? So it's all well
of
and
course,
good to get the headline.
and this is the problem. As always, as we talked about on this pod before, the headline numbers is always actually what's trickled through to the actual delivery on the ground. But what I would say is this is the first time that this defense has become, we've seen defense budgets whittled away over the last 20, 30 years, everyone relying on the US, etc. But this is now a hair on fire problem. And we as startups, or, Pete as a founder and we as investors in startups, we like customers with hair on fire problems, because, then they may be more willing to buy on the kind of timelines that we need them to. However, let's not forget, before we get too excited about, defense, startups in defense, etc., this is a very, the procurement is an incredibly long process. There is a very small number of buyers, right? In the US, 24 countries, 25 countries. I know within each one you have different departments, etc. But this is a very protracted kind of process that startups are going to face on the go-to-market journey. So yes, I think budgets
do you think that's still going to be the case? Because warfare has changed. I mean, we're going to talk a bit about drones and those kind of things later.
I really, we're not going to see a COVID-style VIP fast lane for new technologies that, and I think probably governments have learned from that you still need to have, rules and regs in place. So yes,
as long as Michelle Moan isn't building drone jammers, we'll be fine.
Well, that's true. Something she just won a $2 billion contract for exactly drone jam. But I would say, let's just not forget that. But clearly, this is all great news. This is great news for dual use companies and pure play defense companies. And I'm excited about it. And my last two investments wouldn't have been in this space without being excited about it.
But just to play the contrarian view on this, you've got Keir Starmer and all of the Western European sort of alliance, the European sort of like coalition, talking tough against Putin and saying we're going to invest all this money to build up defense. Whereas you've got Trump, whilst, we don't necessarily agree with a lot of his policies, is trying to really just get to a point where we can, stop militarizing against each other in terms of sending more weapons, because it hasn't got us anywhere. And so to what extent are we actually... Yeah, but let me finish the point. Like, to what extent is Europe actually creating the problem that doesn't need to be there, which is we should not be responding by showing more strength of defense. We should be trying to be a bit more like, how do we just be a little bit more strategic about how do we get to, how do we even concede on some things just to get, less people having to continue putting themselves in harm's way. Start with a ceasefire, and then maybe then the defense spending can happen, but less on the knee jerk of we have to do something because Russia's this big aggressor. Because we're actually stoking the bear as well by putting ourselves out there.
I think maybe we're conflating short-term and long-term issues here, right? I'm not saying I disagree with you. Like, on the short term, I agree with you. I think that a deal needs to be done in Ukraine. And by the way,
I agree. By the way, yeah.
Pete Hegseth came out, said they want to reduce US DoD, Department of Defense spending by 8%, right? So the US defense budget, $800 billion, so nearly double what I just said about Europe. They want to bring that down. And actually a big market for European defense companies would have been ironically, that market is actually contracting, the biggest defense market in the world. However, I think on the long-term strategic, and you use the word strategy there, is, we now realize that the US is not as a reliable a counterpart as we would have thought. We have effectively outsourced our defense to the US over the last 40, 50 years. And you can see that in, European defense spending and capabilities. We have made ourselves completely reliant to the point where even if we wanted to deploy without them, we still need to rely on, air refueling, air cover, various, due to various interoperability issues as well. I think, and surveillance, I think we haven't really got the space surveillance capabilities that we should have in Europe. So I think that's the wake-up call, which means that even if a solution is reached on Ukraine, not going to change what we just talked about.
No, I agree with you.
Europe still needs to get that kind of defense sovereignty. And I know none of us want to go to war, but, ultimately, the deterrent needs to be there, I'm afraid.
Yeah. It's crazy how much is spent on NATO versus how much military aid was provided to Ukraine from the US. You're talking about 65
I've broken down the NATO figures. I'm going to go into that in a second. But I wanted to just share something that I was listening to Neil Ferguson, the historian and the author, the other day.
Okay. Careful.
He's an interesting character.
Yeah.
But he did say one thing that really resonated that I didn't know, was that the US is now spending more on debt than they are on defense. So what I don't think people fully appreciate, and we have mentioned this before on this point, is how much debt the American government has. It's $32 trillion.
But by the way, sorry, the UK is spending $100 billion a year on interest payments, and the UK defense budget is $50 billion. So actually, the UK is spending
double
2x its defense budget on debt, and it's spending pretty much half, probably 2/3 of the NHS budget on debt. So the US, that's a huge number.
But the numbers pale. The numbers pale. So
cool, that's $800 billion a year. So in debt service in the US.
Yeah. So the challenge, this is why Doge and all of the Trump flavored VCs in Silicon Valley are taking a poop. Is because debt's going to crush, but it really will. The level of debt that the US government is holding will crush it. It is almost game over. So I understand. I don't like how it's being done. I think there's the how and the what, and then there's all of the feelings that are baked in. And it's sometimes hard for me as an emotional creature to disenfranchise the emotions from the facts. But there is a very genuine reason why the US can't. They put nearly $1 trillion into NATO annually. They're 1/3 of the budget, and they can't do. Okay, that's only 3.5% of GDP, which is less than Estonia, Poland, and others. But the number is absolutely massive. So just to break down some of the NATO spend for a bit. So we all talk about NATO, and I talk about it like I know what it is, but I actually had to look it up to really remind myself all of the numbers, facts, and figures. So, military alliance of 31 countries from North America and all across Europe, founded in 1949. Budget of NATO is 3 trillion, and roughly just under 8 trillion is the US contribution. It's like 900 billion. By the GDP, it was funny looking at them all on a map. By GDP, the countries that contribute the most are bordering Russia. Poland, Estonia, Latvia. So it's, you know, there's an interest.
And here in Portugal, we're kind of lower down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're slow. I think Spain, Canada, Portugal.
I mean,
basically, the further away you are, the less there is going in.
Yeah, I'm half Polish, and you know, there's a lot of people that are like proud of at least Poland, like putting in their fair share on that when it comes to
growing. I think they're pushing to 5%. I mean, they're already around 4%, and they're putting in even more. So, and I get it. I mean, it all makes total sense. So on the private side, I couldn't quite work out the exact figures, but it looks like the amount of VC that's gone into defense has gone up about 30% over the last year, now about 5 billion or so. I was also intrigued to see how many more funds are going to pop up coming out of Ukraine, like D3, which was backed by Google's Eric Schmidt. So a bit to your point about your hair on fire, Lomax, there's this kind of needs must. I think we're going to see more specifically from that region around defense, and some very interesting technologies coming out, especially out of those bordering countries. But Lomax, what would you do if you were starting up and open to defense and or dual use? Where would you focus?
So I think there's 2 interesting areas that spring to mind. One on the sort of administration of defense and defense spending, and one on the act of defense or offense. So I think what I touched on earlier is procurement. I feel like there must be, firstly, it's very opaque. It's very long. There is now a very increasingly long tail of very like point specific, vertical specific problem, like solutions to problems. So which actually are going to struggle on the distribution side. So I think almost, and I'm talking my own book here a little bit because we just made an investment in a company that does this, or, you know, I'm happy to disclose that. But I think it's a very interesting problem that Founder's working on, which effectively is a B2B marketplace on the procurement side. So I think that's fascinating. Yeah, like both elevating the knowledge of the supplier landscape and then layering in a marketplace component. So that's on the kind of administration procurement side, because I think
I love how you say procurement is fascinating. I think I'm gonna frame that one.
Just wake me up after this one is finished.
Well, yeah, boring. You always make, you know, in VC you want to be investing in boring, boring
I love
stuff,
boring.
right? Boring problems.
I love boring. I'm with you. I'm being a snark. I'm totally with you.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, our last investment that we're just closing now is in Rocket Cargo. So, I mean, that's the opposite of boring, which is defense. So,
sexy.
All right.
Which is using rockets to suborbitally deliver cargo around the world, which is very, very cool. More on that to follow. The second area I think is, look, I'm no expert here. Like, I was never in the military. I'm still learning. I've met, during the last 12 months, met a bunch of companies working on very specific things. I'm actually in the field. I think, what's the biggest thing we've learned in Ukraine? Well, many things, but certainly these use of these very cheap, swarms of drones, both on that. And so I think I've met very interesting companies working on both the new defensive capabilities against those drones, and then also how to use those drones in an offensive capability.
When I was in Ukraine, I went to a factory. It was the most incredible experience in an undisclosed location in Ukraine where they were making these drones. They were shipping in all of the component parts and building these drones. It was. Do you
want to share why you were actually there in the first place?
Oh, I've really bored Lomax with this. So we were delivering trucks and medical supplies. So there's a lovely thing run by a couple of young lads called Jake and Finn who run a charity called Driving Ukraine, and we take trucks down with medical supplies. So you pack up these trucks with medical supplies. But the amazing thing is that you meet the actual troops that are going to be taking these things to the front line, because we're obviously 500 miles from the front line, and then they drive them down. And I got a WhatsApp message last week from one of the drivers, and because the Russian snipers they shot what they thought was the driver's chair, so smashed the window and shot through what they thought, because it was right-hand drive, because it was a UK vehicle. Yeah. So, and he sent,
Wow.
this is the amazing thing. This is the state of warfare these days. So the guys who we know are sending us images of the trucks and what's happening on the front line. It's the most harrowing and incredible thing.
We don't want to veer into stuff where we are not necessarily fully competent, but why not? Let's have a go. NATO could be dead with the way that Trump's throwing his weight around. You know, we talk. You know, the US, the need of the US is.
Do you think if the US left, it would die?
Well, it is kind of, it only works with the US, right?
I think at the moment it only works with the US because, you know, the Article 5 security guarantee only really works with the US might, you know, in a way the US is sort of, I mean, it may not work and fast forward 10, 15 years, then it may be able to, you know, a new kind of alliance might work and have the credibility. But ultimately,
at the moment,
what is NATO?
that's meant to be ironclad. And the moment it's not ironclad, which is essentially what's been insinuated, then it's really not.
Yeah,
credible.
I mean, the problem is now is that even if Trump gave security guarantees, you know, which I don't think he will, like the US, I'm not even sure they're that reliable these days. I mean, it's one of the many things you'd learn.
I mean, there's a philosophical point that's maybe not European VC centric, but the point here is that, just to maybe conclude on the subject a little bit, is that, you know, we have all this access to information, technology, and advancements of understanding what we should and should not do. And yet the lack of wisdom of knowing where we are building stuff that creates incredible power that's technically outside of our control. And what will happen when it does go out of our control? You know, we're putting all this money into AI, defense, and so on. At what point do we lose control of what that will do? And then who wins then? Nobody.
Cool, blimey. We're such a bunch of Debbie Downers. Cool.
Let's be positive.
I guess it is upside, right? But I guess the need for this right now, I semi fear for what's not being focused on and where money is not being spent, because obviously funds are being diverted into defense. So that's possibly a pod for itself. But I do love the fact that this is aligned and absolutely created this kind of unifying nature across Europe. All the words seem to be pushing into action now. And I love the fact that this has woken the beast. I think of one thing that we can be thankful for from Trump is the fact that he's not a politician. He's not a diplomat. So he's not saying the nice words up front and doing the dirty deals behind the scenes. We know exactly what's going on. So I think this is actually quite a unifying force. And I'm kind of okay with that, to be fair.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, the coalition of the willing and all that you know has been banned around this week. But you know, tell that to Viktor Orban, sadly. And this is actually one of the main issues with the way the European Union is set up and the way that every country has a veto, is that you can have all this great stuff, but if Orban vetoes the latest proposals they put forward on defense,
sure.
like it's just the whole thing is for nothing. So I think that's a real. It really undermines the EU, sadly. But yes, you're right. Yeah. I love the sentiment. And by the way, sorry, on NATO, you might need to do some editing here, Dan. It is, sorry, I've just done it. It's 3 billion is the central budget of running the administration of NATO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The trillions is all, if you aggregate, no, 3 billion was right. If you take all the individual budgets, like the 800 billion, the 400 billion, whatever, then you get to the trillions, right?
Right, so I want to move on to a little staying Trumponomics-ish and looking at tariffs and how tariffs are going to come to the EU, because it was not only 2 weeks ago Trump announced that he was going to launch tariffs on Europe. Automotive was named specifically, and then immediately the ECB reduced rates by 25 bips to just try and signal some growth and say we're back on it. So that was 2.75 down to 2.5. Not that I have any signs as to that being working, but that's not a bad thing to do, to kind of try and get some growth back into the pot. And the US, so I looked behind the fence a little bit. So the US does have a trade deficit with the EU. It's around 200 billion. So we sell in 600 billion or so, and they sell in about 400 billion this way. We import aircraft, medical, energy, and tech. They import cars, pharma, chemicals, machinery, and luxury goods. So
well,
we're going to see
they can keep their Boeings, can't they? And that's one thing.
I think, yeah, especially the ones where the wings fall off. don't fly anything, don't send anything to space, that's for sure. So we are going to see some more supply shocks, and there is going to be more market volatility, and then there is going to be more inflation, assuming that tariffs are not just rhetoric and scaremongering and trying to get people to come to the table, which we all know is a very, very powerful Trump tactic. But it feels like there's opportunity for startups here. It feels like there's opportunity for us as VCs and founders, either selling more locally, or as in with this renewed anti-American sentiment, or moving to the States, or doing both. But Lomax, where would you take this?
Sorry, why is there opportunity here? I don't see it. I mean, you can enlighten me afterwards. So I think two things that spring to mind in relation to these tariffs. There's a sort of macro sentiment one, and then there's a micro, actually what's going on the ground with our startups week to week, month to month. So on the macro, this could lead to inflation, which will lead to inflation, which may see rates go up again, which we all know, as we've seen in the last few years, will mean it's harder for equities to raise money.
Stagflation the worst, right? We probably will see stagflation is the assumption, I think.
So I think generally, it's harder. The fundraising environment will be harder, both for us as VCs and for Pete and his, fat co-founders and founders and colleagues, etc., in the founder community. On the micro, so not great on the macro level, but that would take time to trickle through. And to be honest, I'm sure the tariffs will probably be cancelled by the time that actually becomes an issue. I'm sure this is a negotiating tactic. I'm sure, right?
Sounds like it.
On the micro, I think the key will be, as always, the devil will be in the detail as to which actual category of goods and services that this impacts, right? But assuming that this does impact, I mean, if I look at my portfolio, where I have, company we talked about, Andrew, and the 7% portfolio, a company called MagDrive developing engines for satellites and space. So they'll be made here, they're sold in the US. So I can imagine that could suddenly face a 25% tariff. I have SaaS businesses selling, software as a medical device into US hospitals, and they're selling live, they're in market, they're growing 50% a year. US hospitals love them. They have a monopolistic position. It's a great business, but what happens if suddenly that's also got a 25-30% tariff applied to it? So that will actually affect short-term sales for a lot of these companies. So I think in the short term, for companies that are selling into the US, it will be hard. Then you say, well, why don't we sell more into Europe? But I mean, we all know that particularly in sectors like healthcare, it's very hard to sell into Europe. And actually, the US is the biggest healthcare market in the world. It has a much more homogenous than it is in Europe. And that applies to a number of other verticals and sectors within Europe that don't have the language problem, et cetera, the regulation problem.
On the health side, looking at the figures, it's roughly 10 times larger on the health.
It's huge. I mean, the US spends 20% GDP on healthcare, right? So I think the point is that it's going to be harder. For a lot of our startups, the US is the target market, right? And that will not change. And so this will make it harder for them. I think you may see more founders leaving at pre-seed to build companies there, to weave in that US DNA, which is something we've talked about before and something that we at Outsized, firmly believe in, sadly, against my kind of European blood, as it were. But that's what I think. I think it's a terrible thing, Dan, and I don't think there's a silver lining.
I think that, with all adversity, there's opportunity. I am with you on all the points you raised. That, to me, what I'm kind of playing with notionally is there is a lot of anti-American energy and feeling. I mean, you've obviously all seen
Tesla sales in Europe as an example, right?
76% down in Germany. So only lightly down, 24% down in the UK, I think, but 76% down last month in Germany. It's massive. And you've seen the Canadians signing in, not into law. I don't know what the piece of paper was that they were signing, but they are effectively saying we're not going to be drinking Jack Daniels. We're not going to be buying whatever it is. So and I don't know what is the reality and what's just obviously media clickbait, but my sense is there will be, and we talked about the Buy EU. What was that Buy EU domain that we talked about last week? Or you weren't with us, Lomax, but there was basically people saying, here's the European alternative to the American product or service. So Buy European. I think Mike Butcher from TechCrunch posted it today on LinkedIn. So that's doing the rounds. Again, what's fluff and what's noise and what's reality? Who really knows? But I cannot help but think there will be a push to get that the EU Inc. cross-border startup selling. There will be a push and an energy around buying European. I think that will happen. What impact that will have on real money, cash in bank, who knows? But I think there's gonna be an aspect of that that's real.
Maybe in consumer goods. Yeah, startups in consumer goods potentially.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between what the consumer reaction will be and what startup founders and investors do, right? So it's easy for a Canadian to decide not to drink Jack Daniels and drink a Scottish whiskey, and it's not going to be too much skin off their nose. If you're a automobile company like in Germany, then you are really screwed, right? Because you're relying on a huge number of exports to that market. Suddenly slapping on a 25% tariff means that the US consumer is not going to, buy the Porsche. They're going to buy the local equivalent if they can afford that. Some will, but most won't. And we already see some structural systemic problems in, say, countries like Germany, where they, arguably are becoming less and less competitive. And so what do? Do they then suddenly, set up a plant in the US? That's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take years.
They have loads. They have loads in Mexico, but which is a double whammy because all of their plants, they've got lots of activity in Mexico. I mean, looking at the numbers, it was roughly 10% of their volume. I think VW make around 6 million cars a year. And I think half a million were being built in Mexico. But obviously they're double screwed. So it's
well, ironically, it's cheaper to get a German car in America than it is in the UK. I can tell you that, even though they have to ship it all the way over there or build it.
And they're not buying anything in China either. I mean, you've seen Mercedes sales in China fall through the floor. So this is I think, the German automotive industry is in real trouble.
But to your point, Dan, I think there are winners and losers. And I think there are, if you think about the companies that are not, say, so heavily into the manufacturing side, data-driven businesses, Humanity is a case in point. You may not realize this, but Humanity is actually a US Delaware C Corp. We have a UK limited company. So we have, we leverage both companies for different reasons. But it's easy, you can spin up a server in a different country quite easily. You can have IP, therefore, that's based and sell, contract from, a US entity versus a UK entity quite quickly if you're a data-driven AI business, for example. So whether that means you have startups that set up other offices and trade from that, company,
I think that's what's going to happen. I think you're bang on, Pete. I think people are going to mirror what you're doing. They're going to very quickly have these non-touchable entities in each country.
And so from that point of view, there's an element of that will create a shift, right? You will see, companies that want to take, to your point, Lomax, you're not going to have, where US is a huge market for you as a startup, you're not just going to turn your nose up to that market. You're going to find ways to still address that market, which means setting up shop or having boots on the ground, having potentially relocating. So there will be some, let's say, attraction for the US to have these tariffs. It's the question of what is the other unknown effects? Like we've heard probably the example of the iPhone, which is in the world of globalization is about 100 countries that have to contribute towards the making of an iPhone. It's not as simple as move everything into the US. And if it did, it would cost $3,000 plus to have an iPhone. Our customers are willing to pay that. So it's going to be very interesting to see how sort of long it's in place for and what effect it actually has on all of the go-to-markets of these types of products.
I think, Lomax, you're right. I think this is a negotiating tactic because I remember seeing on Fox News, even on Fox, they were going around to supermarkets and car dealerships and sharing what tariffs would mean for all of the products. And the reporter was saying, look, this Dodge Ram truck or whatever it was, is going to be $20,000 more expensive. It's going to go from $80,000 to $100,000. So even Trump's allies, even Fox News is now starting to kind of question and challenge what's going on with tariffs. So I think you're right. I think this is a negotiating tactic only. Somebody posted today, I think it was on X, about how the economy in the States worked with regards to tariffs, 100 years ago and hundreds of years ago and 50 years ago, and how the shift of government revenue has shifted. And effectively, it's basically saying Trump is trying to take us back to 100 plus years ago, where a lot of the government revenue was from tariffs, but it just doesn't work for all the reasons that we know.
Yeah.
Anywho,
Pete,
I want to talk about health. I want to get into your head, Pete, and talk about health and all of the healthy goodness. So you shared earlier today this incredible discovery that scientists have found a new part of the immune system.
That's right.
I was trying to work out what this would mean for antibiotics discovery and treatments and therapies, but tell us what's going on with this new discovery.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, it's actually an organization in Israel called the Weizmann Institute of Science, and they've actually been looking at something that's not to be confused with the proteome, but the proteasome, which is a bit of a mouthful. But this is a cellular component that's long thought to be, solely responsible for recycling old proteins. But they've just kind of discovered that it actually has a mechanism that can potentially create loads of natural antibiotics in the body. And we know that there's been a huge rising alarm of the lack of the antimicrobial resistance problem. And there's actually 1 million people in the world that are dying because of the lack of antibiotic effectiveness to certain infections. So if this discovery proves to be effective, then this could create a whole new wave of antibiotics being brought into the market, and I think that presents an incredible opportunity for the health and life science sector in the UK and in the EU to sort of capitalize on that for the next generation of infectious disease drug opportunity, new drugs to tackle that.
Will it open up more opportunity for startups, investment? What do you think the implications are for the ecosystem?
Well, I mean, we're already pretty. It's one of the growing sectors, obviously, of the VC stroke startup world is health tech anyway, and we're seeing a lot of AI being applied to drug discovery and early diagnostics. So I think that's not slowing down. I just think that this is another sort of huge signal to show that there is just so much opportunity here for us to sort of now taking the ability to look at the data that we weren't able to make this kind of discovery before, and how we can start to identify these new targets. And in this case, it could be literally a whole new field. And the fact that it's from is something that's created from your own body. If you think about the regulatory environment when it comes to the toxicity risk and having to do clinical trials for safety, or something like this, where it's something that's produced by your own body, it's likely to get fast-tracked in terms of regulatory approval because of the fact that your body obviously already produces this. So if it's something that can help strengthen the immune system, whereas before we thought we were looking for soil extracts to try and find new antimicrobials that are resistant to drugs, this actually could pave the way to some real rapid innovations and startups that want to target these areas and come up with new drugs.
Well, let's hope there's a bit more kind of activity. It's great because we've been hearing a lot about drug resistant diseases. So this sounds wonderful. And you also I can't remember the name of it. You talk about proteosonomics, and now we're talking about proteomics.
Well, proteomics is another area, and there's actually been something interesting happening in that field. So to dumb it down a little bit, your bloods there's different ways of analyzing your bloods. You can look at the metabolomics, you can look at the proteomics, you can just look at markers in a standard way. And actually one of the things that humanity has done quite recently in this area, which is, I think, just one of many examples where you can capitalize on looking at the data of biomarkers, is that we were able to partner with Imperial College London. And our approach was, how do we create predictive health value or understanding with the least amount of data? Because the real world has sparse and varied data. So can we take even as low as, in our case, 4 blood markers and highly predict your risk of disease and death? And we came up with a model that did that at 11% more predictive than the most accurate model out there before, called PhenoAge, and it got published in Nature. And so that's now paving the way for our go-to-market, where we can partner with lab groups, health providers, primary care providers, to actually give this health insight to customers or patients who are getting their bloods, and they want to understand how healthy they are. Even doctors don't understand this stuff very well. And in the news this week was around how these pharma companies have come together to try and look at, again, like what we did. We trained our data on the UK Biobank. They've looked at 500,000 participants from the UK Biobank, and they've identified all of these interesting targets using the proteomic approach, which is another way of looking at the bloods, which could help detect disease more accurately much earlier. whether that be cancer, whether that be, autoimmune deficiencies, or frankly anything. So again, that provides a whole new way in which to, come up with, health solutions for populations at large.
Loving it. Lomax, you know a bit about this world, don't you?
No, I think it's very interesting. I think, well, on the first piece of news, I think it's great to see cutting edge science. Just a reminder that cutting edge science doesn't always come out of the US. This time it came out of Israel. Like the Weizmann Institute is clearly a leading academic center that produces phenomenal research. So that's great to see. I think I may be less optimistic than Pete on it. Just that it will take a bit more time to get the evidence.
There we go. There's the cynic. There we go. Bring back the miserable middle-aged man. Loving it.
It's all great stuff, but there's a lot to work through. Is what I'm saying. It was saying. It's just, and we know how these things work. But sure, it's fantastic, and for the reasons that Pete said, I think there's huge optimism around it.
Yeah.
I think on the proteome more generally, and because we actually made an investment in this space 3 years ago, we think it's very, very interesting. And the way I kind of think about it at a very high level is over the last 20 years, we had the genome was the area of huge interest, right? So that was driven by sequencing coming down from 100 million a pop down to $500. So the technology driven by companies like Luminex and Alexa out of Cambridge that was acquired by Luminex. That was again UK core technology.
That's right.
That enabled us to discover and learn more about the genes in our body. So we have roughly 20,000 different genes. That then unlocked, so we got the information on the discovery side, and then we were able to implement that and actually, come up with treatments off the back of that. So, we've seen, CRISPR-Cas9 on gene editing, new gene therapies. You can now use gene sequencing to target immunotherapies. I mean, in the case of my own cancer, the cancer was sequenced and we came up with a whole bunch of treatment options off the back of that, right? So that's been a step game change in healthcare. That's on the genome side. Now the proteome, and by the way, I'm not sure the total number, but I think we have between 100,000 and 400,000 different proteins in our body. So it's that's a big range, but we're kind of we've done 20 years on the genome. We're now going to do maybe 20 years on the protein side of things. And we're only just now getting the ability to sequence on the protein side. So actually, we're still at the beginning of that journey. So I'm hugely optimistic about it. There's no caveat here, Dan. Don't worry. Other than the fact that it will take time to trickle down.
But the movement into personalized medicine, the movement into predictive medicine,
personalized medicine. Yeah, exactly.
There's something it feels like we're making step changes, obviously mainly driven by AI, that are going to absolutely game change, not only on the personal responsibility side, but how national health is managed. And I think this is super exciting. And I'm extremely proud, pleased, excited to be part of the crew that's going to watch all this stuff come to pass, because this is obviously our kids are going to be benefiting from this stuff.
Yeah, I feel like we were born about 20 years too early, sadly, in some respect. Again, because it's funny, we were making investments in predictive medicine, I've got about 10 years ago now, and actually in a way we were a little bit too early. And
it's timing,
even though
it's always timing.
It's timing in venture land is definitely timing as well. When you're raising money every 18 months, but
those time cycles are really exponentially speeding up now. So you can see what we were going to see in 10 years. Then you're going to see in less than 1 year now. Literally,
you're seeing the flywheel actually. Yeah. And then you're seeing that through in the fundraising rounds. I think that you're seeing other companies getting funded now, and that feeds into that.
And hence areas like longevity and AI in diagnostic and early detection is booming, because they can see that this is actually now a viable target where we can actually look at a cellular reprogramming opportunity to extend lifespan or to reverse disease risk, which was something that was just frankly not even a possibility 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, Brian Johnson will be super, super happy, I have no doubt. Yeah, because lots have been spent. I mean, around 7 billion was invested in health tech last year in Europe, but that's against 23 billion in the US. And at the peak in 2021, that was around 32 billion. But Europe has grown 7-fold in 10 years compared to the US at about 4-fold. So we are definitely at the
always better to have a smaller base. Yeah.
Well, I think it's the one thing that I've always felt that Europe does extremely well. And obviously it's driven by AI. And I love the fact that it's, apart from pretty pictures and sexy videos. AI is actually, health is one of the key cornerstones that is being affected. And last month, so obviously the Swedish startup Nico Health, co-founded by Daniel Ek from Spotify, they raised $260 million Series B for their body scanning, and Biograph is now out of stealth, which is Peter Attia's, the health guru. His startup's doing a similar thing. Function Health, they're looking at a $2 billion valuation, and Sam Altman-backed Retro Biosciences raised $1 billion Series A, a cool billion. It's like, what is a seed round anymore? What is a Series A? But Pete, we do this well. But what, from your perspective, what's hot and what's coming down the pipe?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's all the areas that touch on, AI and early diagnostic, early detection. I think that what Daniel Ek is doing with Nico is really fascinating, because it shows that at the higher end, people are willing to spend, £300 to get a slightly different perspective on their health. That's something that people are willing to pay for, and there's a high demand amongst a small number of people to do that.
I did it last year. I thought
what did you think?
I loved it. It was like Star Trek, Star Wars rolled into
especially the skin cancer detection, right?
When you're watching a fat avatar of yourself kind of rotate on the screen in front of you. But I immediately, from the immediate first moment I stepped in there, and they're doing the bloods, and they do things like they just do logical things, like they don't just take one blood pressure cuff of one arm. They know that blood pressure is different throughout the body. So they do 4. They do both legs and both arms, and they take your blood and it gets sucked up into a tube in the ceiling, and those blood results come back in half an hour. It's just obviously the way ahead. It's obviously the future is with us now.
But here's the thing, and this is our view of humanity, and we take, again, a slightly contrarian view to just looking at that. We think there's massive opportunity, don't get us wrong, in creating these incredible experiences in longevity
clinics. I can hear a
clinics.
but coming.
The but is that, I think that there's not enough ambition amongst founders who enter the health space about how we can create population health impact. Because no matter how much you scale these clinics, there's only going to be a certain percentage of the population that want to spend £300 every time they do a scan.
Yeah, but they've got to start somewhere, right, Pete?
But this whole top down, eventually it will trickle down. That's where it will take 10, 20, 30 years, and actually may never get there, right? How about you go bottom up? And I think if you go bottom up with AI and the ability to understand data that's already in existence, not about one day we'll get this and eventually this will become affordable, but how do we empower doctors? How do we empower hospitals? How do we empower the consumers to even just understand how healthy they are?
Consumers want to be empowered, Pete. This is the challenge that I have. Well, if you're feeding your kids turkey Twizzlers and drinking 9 pints a night, you are not going to be interested in Humanity's app or health scanning or any of the above. So
I agree, but I tell you, the 2 insights that we had from building our app to a few 100,000 users, and this is the interesting thing. So first thing was that longevity is not ready for the mainstream in the sense like, meditation has become. Like, we might all listen to Huberman or watch his podcast and Attia, but that's in the single-digit millions.
I find that's not the
billion. That's not a billion people. That's not the Joe blogs on the street. They're not going, how do I measure my aging? How do I optimize, my lifespan, health span? That's just not, what people are looking for on the streets. However, what we did find is when you gave people this insight of how healthy they are. So in other words, someone who might be, just use an example, a 50-year-old who's actually really, doing a lot of exercise, has a high VO2 max, thinks they're super healthy, but they have like a history of high cholesterol, and they go, oh, well, that's just, this. So they get their bloods, and they're like, yeah, but, that's our family all get high cholesterol. And so they have this dissonance around their health and thinking they're fine. And then suddenly, in his case, he got his biological age based on his bloods. It said he was 1 year older than his actual age. This is a guy who identified as a 40-year-old and he's 50. So that insight, a little bit like the genie out of the bottle, was like, oh, I'm not as healthy as I thought I was. I need to do something about this. And in his case, he stopped drinking alcohol. He stopped eating sugary snacks. And then 4 months later, got his bloods done again. And it turns out he'd lost 2 years of his biological age in 4 months. And so that left him emboldened to want to do more to continue on that journey. And if you think about the growing obesity problem, type 2 diabetic, issue that is facing not just the Western world, but, even the emerging world, where you're seeing, the younger generations already getting these symptoms now. There is a huge need to, course correct by giving people this understanding that they're actually trending, 3, 4, 5 years older than they are on average. And I think that's an opportunity where we can both do better job of giving people an early warning system to say that you might be heading in this direction. Maybe you want to do something about it, or see a doctor and find out. So giving them even that understanding before they get symptoms, or just giving someone a baseline. And then when they actually do something, is it actually working to make them healthier or not? Because there's a lot of misinformation and, things that don't necessarily work for you. And I think that's where AI, data personalization, preventative health, precision medicine is going to literally change the sick care system, one where it is much more focused on health and well-being, because that will, from a societal perspective, be a huge longevity dividend.
I mean, Lomax, you're treating cancer. You're very conscious. You're a hyper fit dude. You're very conscious of health. What do you think?
Didn't stop me from getting cancer, though, did it? But yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know, Lomax, you had cancer. I'm sorry to hear that, mate. Did you?
It's all right. Well, I just spent 4 hours this morning in a CT scanner. Get the results later.
Can you just share a little bit about what you had? And sorry, just
I had stage 3 colorectal cancer, diagnosed at the age of 38.
Wow.
Having had no symptoms of note. So yeah, and I was, running sub 3 hour marathons, not really drinking, pretty clean diet, lots of outdoor, a bit of stress probably from this job, but it kind of came out of the blue. So, and just for context, stage 4 colorectal cancer, you have a 15% 5-year survival rate. Yeah. So 15% chance of being alive within 5 years. Stage 3, it's better. But the point is, and part of my launch, so I was just listening to what you were saying, Pete. I would say, even though I think you were trying to trickle down from what Dan was saying, to trickle down that to the wider population, I still think it's even, there was sort of even more lower hanging fruits that we should be doing at the population to really move the needle at the population, at the population level, right?
Sugar tax.
Whether it's on like wellness or like not getting sick, and not getting sick, I include or early diagnosis of things like cancer, right? We have some cancer screening programs, but there are only in the UK, I think there are only 3 cancer screening programs, maybe 4.
They're also worried about too many false positives, false negatives, and that's why there's not a huge feeling of
the PSA test is only 60%.
Isn't
it the PSA that's only 60% accurate?
Well, yeah, that's a really a very low accurate test, to be fair.
Yeah. So then it means that actually for a government to sign off on running a screening program means they need to be really, really comfortable that it's not going to yield a massive increase in cost and worry. Literally, like in the case of my condition, colorectal cancer. And by the way, the backdrop here is that, especially if we are going to live longer, there is a 1 in 2 chance that, you will get cancer during your lifetime. So you should really approach it from a mindset of, not depressing, but you should really approach it from the mindset, I will get cancer at some point, however, cancer is completely curable, generally speaking, if you catch it early, right? So
don't all men, when they die, don't they all have prostate cancer?
Well, yeah, exactly. Probably.
Yeah. Something crazy like that.
Something like that.
So I think my point is that there can be a strategy around keeping people healthy, but there can also be a strategy around, it's more on the predictive or preventative healthcare side, which is don't get sick. How do we get these things early? And screening programs and low hanging fruit is, for example, in the UK, I think it is you can get a colonoscopy at the age of 50. I think it was 55. That age is coming down, but a lot of people don't take up that test. You start off with your FIC test, which is your poo in the post test, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people just don't do it. So actually, you should be spending the money on marketing and campaigning to make sure people understand the risks and actually do those things. In a way, those are easier ways to move the needle and simpler than, applying, AI to various health data and
I think it's even.
I get it, but
Lomax, it's even more base. It's even more base to me. We need to have any processed foods, any sugary foods need to be taxed at the union.
And Andrew, he's not on today, but Andrew's a big one on this. And, I agree. There's a lot of, but what you talk about, what you're doing, Pete, is incredibly important, and it will trickle through.
Yeah. Well, I'll
It's
tell you
just-
one thing. I mean, this is a bit of a spoiler of what's coming next, because we have this API now around, giving you a biological age based on very limited data, any like movement, heart rate from your smartphone wearables, any blood test, also any genetic test. So even a sequence, we can do a predisposition age measure, as well as DNA methylation. But what we actually uncovered in our sort of 2+ year sort of journey of like leading into the science to come up with this groundbreaking blood aging model was that in order to achieve that, we had to essentially use AI and data imputation to predict missing markers. So it's looking at the patterns of the combination of the markers that you get, which is something doctors don't understand. And frankly, it's just like trying to understand from an MRI, image. There's only so much even a radiologist can understand by looking at an image based on experience. Data can pick up all these things that you can't see. And so what we're now building is essentially an early version of an open, large biological model. And think of it as an LLM, but for biomarkers. And the idea of that is that we could predict your cholesterol without knowing what your cholesterol is. And moreover, based on how you've moved over the last 6 months, we can predict what that cholesterol will change to in 6-12 months' time. And so that's interesting, like data, right? We could potentially give an early warning to, cancer. There could be an early warning to, metabolic risk. And by the way, we don't need to be the provider of that information. We could just enable, the health ecosystem to, like the physicians, the hospitals, the remote patient monitoring providers to do that, because that will just be a foundational model for them to build on top of. So I think there's going to be more things like that. We're not going to be the only ones, clearly. And I think that's going to change precision medicine, early detection, so we can get cancer at stage 0, stage 1 more effectively.
It has to be the way ahead.
That has to be a good thing, even if it does prove to be a false alarm. I think we want to.
One thing that is like just talking about like time to be alive, like this and the next 10-15 years are a fascinating time to be alive. If you're proactive and have a little bit of disposable income to spend on your health, it's a fascinating time to be alive. If you care about it, which say you should care about it, it's a fascinating time to be alive. There are so many tools that can really, really move the needle for you as an individual, both in terms of increasing your wellness and also preventing yourself from getting really, really sick. The slight problem from a mindset shift is that in the past, the mindset at the population level was to basically outsource your health to the state and not really run a kind of proactive. People didn't like to spend money on it. No one's happy to spend money on holidays and various other frivolities, but not the health. And I think that's changing a little bit.
It will change, and it'll be driven by the supercomputer in your pocket. That's what will drive this revolution, is the fact that your health record will soon be on your mobile phone, and all of your interaction will soon be on your mobile phone. I think that's going to be a massive lever. I want to move on to deal of the week. We've got 3 super cute deals. I was mostly intrigued this week by Alpine Eagle, a Munich-based startup who've just raised $10 million seed, led by IQ Capital here in the UK. I think they're in Cambridge. Because from what we were talking about before, they are a drone blocking and attacking startup. So they send up drones to find and attack other drones. And I love that cat and mouse. And especially after seeing pictures of one of the trucks that we took to Ukraine being destroyed by a fiber optic drone. So that was what caught my eye. That's Alpine Eagle, the drone blocking. Lomax, what was yours?
I like to deal because I think it's the biggest deal that's ever come out of Belfast. So we should be celebrating things like this, which is the Series B of Cloudsmith, working on, cloud software security. Great to see some of our friends, Frontline, etc., on the cap table, and great to see for the Irish ecosystem and continue actually. And in our portfolio, we have 3 companies out of Ireland.
I have to just qualify. This is the Northern Ireland ecosystem. Otherwise, we're going to offend every Irish person on the planet.
This is in Belfast in the Northern Irish ecosystem. Yeah,
there we go. There we go. Pete, what was yours?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking around just seeing if there's something I'd missed, and the one that caught my attention was a company called Quintexa, who raised a 175 million Series F. They're a British startup that were mainly known for their AI-powered sort of abilities to fight money laundering and fraud. But I think what they've kind of been able to do in that sort of 8-9 year journey is like get into understanding how to structure unstructured data for large organizations, both government contracts, large banks, and so on. And that's kind of like fueling this insight that they can actually help these large organizations, government contracts in a big way. And I think it's just scraping the surface. So it's just great to see a British startup that's like
bring on the
leading the charge with that. And so I wanted to pull those out, and give them a bit of kudos.
Give them a bit of a handshake and a bit of a rah-rah. Why not? Loving it. Pete, what are you up to this week?
To be honest, I mean, it's the end of the week, right? But I think between now and this time next week, I'm most looking forward to going on the ice ski trip, which is to Courmayeur with 80 other founders and investors. It's not this weekend; it's the following weekend. So
nice.
I'm basically being a bit of a hermit this week because my wife's being a saint and letting me go away from Thursday next week. But other than that, I'm just going to be, other than trying to book my holiday for the summer with the fam, I'm going to be mainly focused on more partnership conversations. We're getting huge traction with lab groups, so we're just like, there's a lot to sort of go through there. So really excited about that.
Lomax, what are you up to? Apart from living in your new beach
furnishing the new office, getting my surfboard stand set up.
Chaise long.
Shut up. This is ridiculous.
We are, as I say, closing this deal, Rocket Cargo investment, as we speak. And so I'll be catching up with the founder there. And I'll be waiting for my CT scan results. Obviously, but all will be well, I'm sure.
All
so, yes.
will be well. All will be well.
You know what? A deal I did,
web.
Just to give another hat tip to an ISA, Andrew Lacey's company, Pronuvo, talking about scans.
Oh, yeah.
They raised a good 120 million, I think, Series B.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Used by the likes
does
of
it
Kim
do?
Kardashian. Yeah, I did it myself, and I have to say, I really rate the experience. You basically get a full body MRI, and it gives you, cancer risk at stage 0, 1 based on that scan. But it also generally looks at things like your posture, and it puts the scans in like video scans on an app on your phone, so you can also show them off. Pronuvo. Yeah.
Is it? Did they have it in the UK yet or not, or just in the US?
I don't think so yet, but they've expanded quite a big footprint. They were only in Vancouver and then the Valley, and then now they're, I think, across the US. But
they were in New York or Texas as well, or something maybe.
Yeah, I think they're in a bunch of states now, but I think they're going to come over to Europe at some point. But Andrew's a great founder, and really sort of impressed with what he's accomplished there.
I've not heard of them. I definitely want to do a full MRI if I can. I'm fascinated by just the kind of data insights. That's one thing.
The thing to do is the full MRI and also do a ctDNA test, which I think you can't really get for screening in the UK. You should go and do it. When next time in the States, book one in. It's a couple of grand. It looks for circulating tumor DNA in your blood. I mean, I do one now every 4 months to check for recurrence of disease. Yeah, it's expensive. But and it's not covered by insurance. But I would look at there's a the Grail test, the Garvey test. Like not available as a screening tool in Europe, I don't think. But book it in when you're next in the States, and that's.
I'm going to be knocking you both up for these kinds of things. I don't know what these things are. This week I'm.
What are you up to, Dan?
I'm with a data-driven VC crew this week. I'm looking into how to automate my job away, which will be long overdue, and I'm going to do some small personal tickets, little 100k tickets to early stage startups. I want to get 5 done this side of the summer, so I'm working out how to meet really smart founders doing it. I haven't quite sussed out that strategy yet. So
what's your sweet spot? What are the kind of things you're looking for?
Industrials, early, anything in manufacturing industry, ag, health, food, anything kind of early people, maybe even founder dating, maybe even going that far back. But just trying to find some people who want to step out, want to try something new. That's the thinking. Yeah, all right.
Sounds good.
My men, what a joy. Love speaking with you. Pete, thanks so much for your time. We'll catch you next week.
Pleasure to join you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. It was really fun.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.